Now reporting, Tom Yamas.
And we're coming on the air now with some breaking news. One of the world's best-known entertainers appears to be heading to a prison cell very shortly. A judge in Pennsylvania has just sentenced Bill Cosby to no less than 3 and no more than 10 years behind bars. This was video earlier of him arriving to court today. He actually had a smile on his face until he learned the news that we've just learned moments ago. The judge also classified him earlier today as a sexually violent predator. Cosby was convicted in April of drugging and sexually assaulting Andrea Constand at his home in 2004. The jury, for what was a retrial, found Cosby guilty on 3 felony counts. And just moments ago, the same judge in that case, Judge Stephen T. O'Neill, ruling Bill Cosby needs to serve time in prison. Lindsay Davis has been standing by. She's covered this case from the get-go. She was inside court as the judge handed down that sentence. Lindsay, walk us through this.
David, Bill Cosby remained emotionless. He had his head forward. He sat just looking straight ahead. And meanwhile, in the back row, it was filled with maybe about 8 of other Cosby accusers, and they had already handed out tissues. Immediately, the tears began to flow. They were crying quietly so they wouldn't get kicked out of court. Interlocked fingers. They were all holding hands. They were nodding their heads fervently again and again. But it was quiet. You could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. Additionally, the judge said that he'll have to pay for the prosecution costs for court. He has to pay a $25,000 fine. Leading up to his sentence, he gave some really strong quotes directly aimed at Bill Cosby, and he said, "The jury's verdict must be heard loud and clear. You are convicted of a very serious crime." Again and again, he said no one is above the law. He talked about despite how much money and fame and celebrity you have, no one is above the law.
And Lindsay, when the judge classified him as a sexually violent predator, he sent a signal there that this was not going to be much of any leniency, because Pennsylvania state law defines a sexually violent predator as a person who has a mental abnormality or disorder that makes the person likely to engage in predatory sexually violent offenses. Because his defense team was arguing he was 81 years old, he was blind, and he was frail, but that apparently didn't work into the judge's decision.
You're exactly right. It didn't work. The defense, the district attorney rather, had said several times before, look, you don't get a get out of jail free card because you're old. You don't get a get out of jail free card because it's taken this long for justice to catch up to you. And look, the state prisons are equipped for people who are blind, for people who are old. And it seemed very clear early on that the judge, he gave a lengthy statement before he actually gave the sentence, that he wasn't going to buy that. He basically said, look, what you are charged of, it requires that I give you this total confinement, and kept mentioning that he would need it to protect the public, and also that he would need this prison time basically in order to realize the gravity of this charge.
And Lindsay, you've interviewed Bill Cosby during these proceedings. Do you think once the judge handed down that sentence, that it hit him, that he realized he was going to prison? This was somebody who at one point was one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. He was labeled America's dad, and now he's going to be behind bars.
It seems that he had been prepared for this outcome. And to your point, just to kind of talk about the gravity of this situation, there was a quote in 1981 from a former PR exec at Coca-Cola, and he said that the most believable personalities of our day are God, Walter Cronkite, and Bill Cosby. And now you have one, Bill Cosby, formerly one of the most credible voices in our society, now being sentenced to no less than 3 years, but as many as 10 years behind bars, Tom.
An incredible fall from grace. 60 women have come forward and accused him of sexually assaulting them. I want to put up the victim impact statement of the woman at the center of today's sentencing, Andrea Constand. She wrote, "Bill Cosby took my beautiful, healthy young spirit and crushed it. He robbed me of my health and vitality, my open nature, and my trust in myself and others." And we should point out that Bill Cosby becomes the first convicted man in the era of Me Too. I want to bring in Sunny Hostin now, our senior legal correspondent, and somebody who, as a prosecutor, you prosecuted criminals like Bill Cosby. Your thoughts on the sentencing?
You know, it certainly is very clear to me that this judge looked at Bill Cosby as he would look at any other defendant. He was not above the law. This sentence is completely within the range of what you would suspect someone would get, someone that has been convicted, someone that has been classified as a sexually violent predator. The prosecution asked for 10 years in prison. A range of 3, no less than 3 to 10 is completely within the guidelines. And I think it was very clear once he was classified as a sexually violent predator, that means someone that planned this sort of predation. How do you protect the community from someone that can't control themselves, someone that has this sort of malady, mental disorder?
And that was the turning point today, because the argument was he may be 81 years old, he may be blind, he may be frail, but he may know other women out there, and if he's under house arrest, he could still attack them.
That is true. One of the psychologists testified that he had a personality disorder and he has an interest in sex with non-consenting women and was likely to re-offend. And so when you look at that and you look at what you have to do in determining this sort of sentence, which is you look at the previous criminal record, Bill Cosby didn't have one, but the seriousness of the offense, this is clearly very serious. Any aggravating factors, any mitigating factors, he falls squarely within this sentence.
Sonny, thank you. I want to go back to Lindsay Davis for one more question. Bill Cosby, though, is not done fighting, Lindsay. It's our understanding he does plan to appeal, and that appeal process starts right now.
Yes, exactly. According to Pennsylvania law, you can't start that appeal process until after the sentencing. And so there's already a lawyer in court for him to begin that process immediately. I want to also point out that Bill Cosby had the opportunity, and the judge reminded him, they asked him directly, are you sure you don't want to say anything? He had the opportunity to have the final word prior to the judge's sentencing. He chose to stay quiet. But this is a clear victory for the district attorney's office. They asked for the 5 to 10 years. And they're getting at least 3 to 10.
Lindsay Davis for us, Sonny Hostin, thank you so much for your reporting on this. Again, if you're just joining us, Bill Cosby, once one of the most powerful entertainers in this country, has just been sentenced to 3 to 10 years behind bars. He will be in a prison cell, most likely tonight. We thank you for joining us. We're going to return to regular programming right now. We will have much more on World News Tonight with David Muir, and we'll continue our coverage right now on ABC News Live, available at abcnews.com and on the ABC News app. I'm Tom Llamas. Have a good day.
I'm Diane Macedo for ABC News Live. We're continuing this breaking news coverage of that sentencing in the case of Bill Cosby. He has just received 3 to 10 years in prison for 3 counts of sexual assault, 3 counts of indecent assault in the 2004 drugging and molestation of former Temple basketball coach Andrea Constand. I have Troy Slayton, a former sex crime prosecutor from Los Angeles, on the phone with us now. Troy, what do you make of this sentence?
Well, it's what we expected. The judge had a sentencing range of anywhere up to 10 years, and the prosecutors were asking for 5 to 10. All 3 convictions were merged into one for the purposes of sentencing. And what this means for Bill Cosby is he won't even be eligible for parole until 3 years have elapsed. And that's assuming that his appellate attorneys are unsuccessful.
Troy, the other big thing in this is what we learned a little bit earlier today, which was the big question of whether or not the judge would designate Cosby a sexually violent predator. We know, of course, he did. That means he now has to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. He has to seek treatment for the rest of his life. And anywhere he lives in Pennsylvania, authorities will notify the public. How much do you think that impacted the amount of time he ended up getting, and what does the defense do from here?
Well, let's take the second question first. Bill Cosby already has appellate attorneys that were in the courtroom under Pennsylvania law. In order to be able to start the appellate process, he had to be sentenced first. So that's happened, and now the appeals will begin. One question that onlookers have is whether or not the judge is going to allow him to remain free on the $1 million bond pending the appeal. I think based on the judge designating him the sexually violent predator and sentencing him to state prison for 3 to 10 years, him being remanded to the custody of the sheriff is very likely, and him remaining out free on that $1 million bond is very unlikely. Now that being said, being designated a sexually violent predator has impact for the rest of his life. As you indicated, he will be on the National Sex Offender Registry. He has to, once he's out, register with police every 3 months, quarterly, and he'll have to undergo lifetime counseling for his sexual proclivities.
All right, that's Troy Slayton-Forrest, former sex crimes prosecutor in Los Angeles. Troy, thanks so much for joining us. I want to check in with Lindsay Davis, who is there at the court. Lindsay, what was the reaction like when the judge started doling out the sentence?
You know, it was quiet. There were actually a lot of people who were kind of looking around, a little bit unsure of what had just happened because it was such a wide span, 3 to 10 years. And I think that many in the media, many of the accusers were expecting a definitive answer, you know, a certain number of months or a certain number of years. But in general, Bill Cosby did not react at all. There was no movement. He didn't change his position. And the women who were sitting to my left in the back row, there were a number of Cosby accusers in the court, probably about a dozen. They had actually started handing out tissues down the row as soon as the judge came in, so even before he began his first word. And they were all holding hands along that entire row, interlocked fingers, and they began just nodding their heads and crying. You know, the last time when the verdict actually came down, many of them started crying out loud, and so they got kicked out of court. And so all of them just silently, in some cases sobbing today, based on this reaction. And even when a few hours earlier, when the judge had decided that he was going to give Cosby that classification of a sexually violent predator, you saw the tears then. And the hand-holding and the patting of each other, even at that point. And so it seems like they're happy. I mean, really, this is what the district attorney's office had asked for. They asked for the 5 to 10 years. They asked for Cosby would have to pay the $25,000 fee, and that the prosecution's charges, fees would have to be repaid back by Bill Cosby. And so for all intents and purposes, they got exactly what they asked for. You know, the defense attorney, Joseph Green, had been asking for house arrest or probation, citing that he was 81 years old, that he was blind, that he was not self-sufficient, citing recidivism rates, that once you get to be older than 70 years old, that it was highly unlikely that you would sexually assault someone once again, saying that, look, Cosby was a first-time offender and that there is no record that he committed any additional crime or assault within the last 14 years. But none of it worked in the end. You know, the judge made it very clear, saying no one is above the law. He even cited Bible scripture at one point, and saying that he was very sorry, you know, to Bill Cosby for basically how far he had fallen. It was quite a moment, really, you know, for those of us who remember Bill Cosby in his heyday with, you know, Jell-O commercials and Coca-Cola and the Cosby Show. Quite a moment that yesterday one of the Cosby accusers told me in court. She said, being here in court for this reason, it's surreal.
Yeah, quite a fall from grace, and it sounds like the judge actually addressed that, making a statement about fallen angels, and the higher they fly, the harder they fall.
Yes.
I wonder, is there, we're watching some live video now of people emptying out of the courtroom. Do we know yet if Cosby will go immediately behind bars or if the judge will allow him out on bail?
You know, it was widely speculated that he was going to be handcuffed in court and then taken immediately to jail. But again, that was just speculation. And now that I've left the courtroom, I couldn't give you the exact update as far as whether or not that determination has been made. But of course, the moment that we know, we'll pass that along to you, Diane.
All right, Lindsay, thanks. I want to bring in Sunny Hostin. Lindsay, if you could stay with us, too. Sunny, what do you make of this 3 to 10 years? As Lindsay pointed out, that's a pretty big range, and some people were expecting something a little bit more precise.
Well, you know, the sentencing guidelines provide for a range of perhaps 22 to 36 months. So this is completely within the guideline range. I know people feel uncomfortable when they hear, well, 3 to 10, it should be just 10 or it should be just 3. That's just not how it works. I will tell you what was striking to me was the prosecution asked for 5 to 10, or at least the max of 10 years. The defense was asking for probation or house arrest. This fits squarely within the guidelines, so much so that it tells me that this judge looked at Bill Cosby as he would have any other defendant. No lucky breaks for being a celebrity, no lucky breaks for being 81, being frail, being blind. And that is really how justice is supposed to work. So when you look at how a judge comes up with a sentence, the judge has to look at a previous criminal record. Here there was none. The judge has to look at the seriousness of the crime. We're talking about a sexually violent predator. Only about 10% of people that are on the sexual offender registry qualify as sexually violent predators with lifetime counseling requirement. So that goes to show you how serious the offense is. And then the judge looks at mitigating factors. Perhaps he's 81. Perhaps he's, has a loving family. And then the aggravating factors. We have to remember Andrea Constand's 5-page victim impact statement, which the judge quoted from. It's extremely powerful. And I suspect that the judge looked at that and looked at the fact that she said it ruined her life in determining the sentence. So when you look at all of those factors, this sentence is completely appropriate.
I know you're saying it doesn't look like he got any lucky breaks for being a celebrity. The defense tried to have this judge recuse himself a few times. Do you think they could argue that he came down harder on Cosby because of his celebrity status?
I don't think so, not at all, exactly because this falls within what the sentencing guidelines would provide. Again, those aren't mandates, they're just suggestions, they're recommendations, but it seems to me that he was treated as any other defendant would have been treated given the jury's verdict.
All right, Sonny, if you could hang out with us for a little bit. I think Lindsay has some news for us on a potential bail for Cosby. Lindsay, what are you hearing?
So my colleague who remains inside the courtroom is telling us that there is a brief recess right now while the judge considers the argument for bail. He's just heard from both sides. Of course, the defense arguing why he should be able to remain out on house arrest pending the appeal, and the district attorney obviously asking that he be incarcerated immediately. The judge has kind of tipped his hand, though. Here's a quote that the judge just said. The court's reason for not granting bail pending an appeal, he was at risk, and at this stage, I'm just not going to treat him any differently than anyone else that comes through this court. I don't see why I would. And so it sounds like that's an indication that Bill Cosby will be handcuffed inside of this courthouse. We will likely see him then walk with the handcuffs on down the hallway and then leave through a basement level inside the courthouse today.
All right. And Sonny, what do you make of that? I mean, the idea that they just designated him a sexually violent predator seems also counterintuitive to then release him. Is that how it works?
Well, it does, because you've heard testimony during this sentencing hearing that he is likely to reoffend, that he suffers from a personality disorder, a sexual disorder, that he may already have chosen another victim, someone that can't control themselves, someone who has resisted counseling, someone who has shown no remorse. Those are all factors that, when considering whether or not someone should go on house arrest, don't bode well for the request. The other thing, when you're considering letting someone out while the appeal is pending, appeals take a long time. An appeal in this case would be, in my estimation, 2 to 3 years. And you also have to think that you have to make sure that the person is not at risk of flight. The person will return back to the courthouse to start their sentence if the appeal is denied. And then lastly, you have to be able to protect the community while the person is out. If someone is a violent sexual predator, how can you ensure that the community is protected? So it would be odd to me if the judge wouldn't start the sentence today.
And the other thing, the judge, as you mentioned Andrea Constand's victim impact statement. He said it was nothing short of powerful. He said he took it into consideration when considering this sentence. A big surprise yesterday was that Cosby chose not to speak and chose not to have anybody speak on his behalf. Given the sentence, given what the judge said today, we're looking at a little piece of Andrea's statement there. She says, after the assault, I wasn't sure what had actually happened, but the pain spoke volumes. The shame was overwhelming. Self-doubt and confusion kept me from turning to my family and friends as I normally did. I felt completely alone, unable to trust anyone, including myself. And she also alluded to the fact that that continues to affect her today. So the judge clearly took all that into account. Given that, was it a mistake, in your legal opinion, for Cosby not to have spoken or have somebody advocate on his behalf? It
certainly is unusual. You don't see that at a sentencing hearing. In my experience, it has been helpful for defendants, 1, to accept responsibility for their actions, 2, to show remorse, 3, to apologize to victims, and 4, to also take part in counseling that is offered. And so when you have, and also you generally have people in the community that stand by and say, if he is given probation, I will support him. If he is given probation, I will make sure that he is an outstanding member of the community. You didn't get any of that here. Mm-hmm. Do judges consider those statements from defendants? Each and every day, absolutely they do. This judge had very little to work with in terms of Bill Cosby's defense team.
All right, well, now he'll have an appeals process to work with.
That's right.
Going forward. Sunny Hostin, thank you so much.
Thanks.
For being with us. Always great to get your analysis. I want to check in with Lindsay Davis outside the courtroom for parting thoughts. Lindsay, what happens to Cosby from here?
So it appears, we're still waiting to hear definitively, but it appears that he will be sent to state prison, where he will likely be kind of in an isolation, really, for a number of reasons, but also to protect him, to keep him safe. But also, we heard again and again from his attorney that he's not self-sufficient, so he's going to need help. Again, they have said that he is completely blind, and so that's going to require a bit of aid. One thing that I think, 2 points that I'd like to just make, it was interesting because while the judge talked about how significant and impactful Andrea Constand's victim impact statement was, she did not read it from the witness stand. She only said, when she got on the stand very briefly yesterday, Judge, you have heard what I have to say, Mr. Cosby has heard what I have to say, and all that I'm asking for now is justice as the court sees fit. The other thing is, that the groundwork is already in place. The ball's already rolling for this appeal process. A number of attorneys and judges have also said in the past that there is some concern about the fact that in that first trial that ended in a mistrial, the hung jury, the jury unable to come to one final verdict, that they only had that one additional prior bad acts witness, and that in the retrial that they allowed 4 additional. And so it was quite a difference. Other people might say that it was also the climate of the Me Too movement. It was a very different time 1 year later when he was retried, but that was a significantly different trial when you heard again and again 4 additional women on top of Andrea Constand taking that witness stand and saying, it happened to me too, it happened to me too. And so potentially it does sound like the works are underway for an appeal.
It is quite amazing. After years of accusations, 60 women coming forward to now hit this moment. And we know, Lindsay, it's not over for Cosby yet. 4 civil cases are still pending related to sexual assault matters, and at least one attorney in one of those cases has promised her case will go forward. So our thanks to Lindsay Davis outside the courtroom, Troy Slayton over in LA, and Sunny Hostin here in studio with me for covering all of this for us and helping us to understand it all. And our thanks to you for watching us. That does it for us here at ABC News Live. We're going to take it back to WPVI in Philadelphia for continuing coverage on the Cosby verdict. Bill Cosby sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison.
Something is going to play out somewhere in the future, possibly in this trial court, possibly somewhere else in another court.
A hearing, like an immediate hearing, or something?
Well, I don't think it's out of the question. I think we're in. Clearly, we don't know. I think the judge was taken aback by when this came up, and he said, "Look, I'm going to retire for 20 minutes. I'll be back." And so he's going to be at the call of prior.
But your sense was he was displeased with this request, or surprised by it?
It's really hard. Surprised, definitely. Yeah. I can't tell you if he was displeased or not. The judge had just gone through, I got to check my watch, but it seemed like an hour's worth of just, basically explaining why he was going to give the sentence he gave, that, he wanted to protect the public. He needed to also understand that the victim had been traumatized and that this was a serious crime, a serious sexual crime, and that he wanted to impart that information, that this was a very serious crime with a very serious punishment.
Was there something about, too, I can't treat you differently because of who you were?
Yes.
Who you are and who you were.
And he did say that. Look, no matter what your celebrity, what your wealth is, all of that sort of thing, that makes no difference. We have to treat you equally under the law. He made the point that when he does go to prison, and he is going to prison as far as the judge is concerned, he will have to undergo various programs that are set up for sex offenders in the prison. He will have to go through those classes. He is not going to be treated any differently that way.
And you had told me earlier today that there was some discussion about that designation and Mr. Cosby getting a little irritated irritated or a little?
Well, they went through a colloquy. They went through a series of question and answers about his knowledge of the reporting law, the Megan's law, that once he does come out of confinement, he will have to report, as any other person does, on a regular basis to the state police. He will have to let the state police know where he is. Should he move, he has to let the state police know that. He will be on the Megan's List website. Bill Cosby will be treated like any other sex offender in that way. And Cosby got a bit testy during some of the questioning. And sometimes he said he couldn't hear, other times he didn't understand. But he was clearly not pleased with having to be questioned about
You said that was bizarre, too.
It had a surreal feeling to it at times, because I've seen this sort of colloquy, if you will, before, but you don't know who the defendants are. They're not famous. This was America's dad. I mean, in his voice, he's lost very little of the timbre of his voice, and it was really sort of odd to hear that.
All right, we're going to take a break.
To hear about this bail decision, and we will monitor the situation from here at the courthouse.
All right, Sarah, John. Thank you very much, Monica.
All right, we're going to go to Action News reporter Chad Perdelli, and he is in Montgomery County in front of the correctional facility in Eagleville, one possibility of where Mr. Cosby may be taken. Chad, what do you have?
Yeah, as you can hear from Sarah and you can hear from John, there's still a little bit of uncertainty with the legal maneuvering going on there at the courthouse there in Norristown. But I can tell you what the Department of Corrections is expecting here later this afternoon. They're expecting that Bill Cosby will be brought here to Eagleville, to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. Again, this is a county facility. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in a state prison, but he will first come here. He's expected to then enter the building. He will undergo a psychological and a physical evaluation to see if he has any physical needs, medications, all that sort of thing. He will then undergo a psychological evaluation before getting his cell. He will, once inside here, then he will could serve here for days, weeks, possibly months before a state prison is determined where he will eventually end up. You know, so many people talk about that he'll end up at Phoenix here, not far from here, formerly Graterford, but he could be sentenced and moved to a different state facility. That is all up in the air at this point, but what we do know is he'll likely begin his sentence here later this afternoon if all goes as planned here at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. Obviously, there's some stuff going on there inside the courthouse there in Norristown, some legal maneuvering that could change all this, but that's the expectation. Now, you see some of those cameras there in front of us. He's expected to be brought here and then pulled into that fenced-in area, and that is where he will then be taken inside the facility. But we're just waiting for Cosby to be brought here later this afternoon. When that will happen is still very much up in the air as things unfold there at the Montgomery County Courthouse in Norristown. But once he gets here, again, he will undergo, like any other inmate, he will enter this facility, undergo some evaluations. He will learn the rules and regulations of the county prison. He will get his cell, and then he will be like every other inmate. He will be a number. He will no longer be America's dad. He will be an inmate number, and he will start here at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility before then eventually moving to a state facility for his 3 to 10 year sentence. But again, we're awaiting Cosby's arrival here. When that'll happen, still very much in the air, but of course we'll be here live in Eagleville. I'm Chad Perdelli, Channel 6 Action News.
All right, Chad, I'm sorry, Rick. We have a few questions for you about that facility. If he is treated as every other prisoner is there, at least during his time at Eagleville, I would presume he'd be put in a cell with another inmate, that he would wear the inmate clothing, of course. Describe a little bit of the day-to-day aspect of how his life would unfold at that point.
Especially given his age of 81 years old and his frailty.
Well, you know, obviously, you know, he will be like every other inmate. He will be wearing the prison garb. He will be in a cell with other inmates. You know, one thing to mention is, as part of that entry process at any prison, one of the, you know, some of the questions that will be asked are you have any gang affiliations? Of course, it doesn't appear that Bill Cosby has any gang affiliations, but those are some of the questions that occur when inmates are entered into a facility, to make sure that, you know, inmates of different different gangs are not put in the same cell. So those are some of the questions that will be asked to the 81-year-old as he arrives here in Montgomery County at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility as part of the process to enter this facility. But again, once inside, he's like every other inmate. There's no special treatment. Just like the judge said, he will be like every other inmate. He will be wearing the prison garb. He will eat with the rest of the prisoners, and he will be treated as such. Obviously, as an elderly man, as part of the process, he'll undergo that physical and that mental evaluation to determine his needs and any medications or any physical help he may need as he begins his sentence.
All right, Chad, thank you very much. Reporting there from Eagleville, and of course, stand by. That could be the venue where Bill Cosby is brought, depending on what the judge decides there in Montgomery County. Let's go back to the Montgomery County Courthouse, check back in with Sarah Bloomquist, who was standing outside where events continued to unfold since the sentencing. And Sarah, what do you have there now?
I'm here with Ed Fabick, who's a defense attorney, and I want to clear something up here, because if he goes to Montgomery County, that correctional facility, Ed and I were talking about that's a stepping stone, right? He would just go there as part of the processing.
Correct. He would go to Montgomery County Prison. He would eventually get picked up by the state prison system. They will take him. It's generally Camp Hill. There they will classify him and decide which prison he's going to be shipped out to for his sentence.
There was a lot of discussion throughout this part of the sentencing as to which facility is most appropriate given his health conditions. Will they also look at that, would you imagine?
That will certainly be taken into consideration, deciding where they're going to place him. However, based on the sexual violent predator, they have to take that into consideration at this point, and it's going to be up to the state prison system. More likely than not, Judge O'Neill will probably order that he stay at Montgomery County for a period of time, at least until the appeal period runs out, meaning the time period where he can file the appeal.
So right now we have a picture from inside the courthouse where they're going to be going back in. I know John was out here just a minute ago. And can you explain a little bit to our viewers about what the defense is asking of the judge now?
They're essentially saying that, look, he's appeared at everything. He's not a danger to the community at this point. They want him to be able to stay on the street, so to speak, until the appeal is decided. Now, that could take months, maybe even years, until the Superior Court of Pennsylvania ultimately makes that decision. So, in my opinion, I do think it's unlikely that the judge will keep him out of prison at this point, as the sentence has been rendered, and again, the sexual violent predator decision has been made.
And in fact, the judge did tell the court, I can't treat you differently, right?
Correct.
And so then, as that, so you don't think that there's going to be another hearing to decide on bail at this point?
I don't think immediately. I suspect that the defense is going to file what's called a motion for reconsideration almost immediately on everything regarding bail, and probably also regarding the sentence itself. And at the same time, they'll be working on filing their appeal.
And the appeal process, no surprise in a case like this. We knew this was going to happen, right?
Of course. Once he was found guilty, it's no surprise that the defense is going to file an appeal. And
that process could take years?
It could take more than a year, most definitely. Okay. What happens is you file your notice of appeal, the Superior Court gives you a briefing schedule, and that's months and months in the future. Then they have the right to go and argue that before the Superior Court. Then the Superior Court has to take it into consideration and make a decision. In a case like this, where they're going to be looked at by the media and scrutinized heavily, I suspect they will take their time in making that kind of decision.
The sentence of no less than 3 years, no more than 10, how does that play out in your mind, given the state recommendations?
I think in this kind of case, you're going to see Mr. Cosby spend more than the 3 years in prison. After 3 years, he has the right to see the parole board, and they're going to decide whether or not they can release him. But again, he, under all the circumstances here and the totality of them, I do not see him being released to 3 years. I believe he's going to do longer.
He gave no statement today. At no point during the first trial or the retrial has he shown any remorse or taken any responsibility. Does that play a role in what he got sentenced to today?
It weighs heavily on what the judge decides. I'm not saying that if he would have said that he was sorry or accepted full responsibility that the judge would do any less under the circumstances, but it is certainly something that weighs heavy on the judge's mind when they're deciding a sentence.
The judge looks at what we call the aggravating and the mitigating circumstances. These 5 other women, the prior bad acts, as they call them, who testified, Would the judge have seen those as an aggravating factor, that there are these other women?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I believe that's why he structured the sentence the way he did with such a long tail. He could have sentenced that sentence in 3 to 6 years, but instead he decided 3 to 10, which means he's going to be supervised by the Board of Parole for a longer period of time here.
Is that in case there are other cases that come forward? Is that possible?
I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
But I think he wants supervision for this man for an extended period of time.
And his age, does that typically ever factor in his sentencing?
It does factor in the sentencing, but with such a serious case, the judge can't take that as one of the stronger reasons that he should mitigate a sentence. This was more of an aggravated sort of circumstance, but instead of doing that, the judge structured a sentence where he was just top of the Pennsylvania guidelines.
The Cosby team throughout has really gone after this judge, even on a personal level. Would that as well have played in the judge's mind, or do judges have to try to keep what's happening outside the doors?
I don't believe that the judge would have let that come into his mind or play into his mind. The attorneys had to do what they have to do out there. He understands that, and he's a fair judge. He despite how he may have personally felt, it doesn't sound like, and it doesn't seem at all like he let that factor in.
This has been years of this, one trial, and then a hung jury, and then a retrial, and now we are here. I think we're in the 4th year, or approaching the 4th year. Is that uncommon for a district attorney to be this persistent and then keep going after this to try to get the conviction?
It is not uncommon in these more serious cases. There was a long sordid history with this case.
Right.
And Kevin Steele decided he was going to prosecute it, and he followed through to the fullest extent that he could.
All right, Ed, thank you so much.
You got it.
Thanks for standing in the rain with us. Not the greatest circumstances as we wait here outside the Montgomery County Courthouse. We're waiting now. Judge is having a hearing right now, or is deciding right now whether or not to have a hearing to decide if Bill Cosby should receive bail. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Sarah. In the meantime, we have a few more bits of information as we await the next chapter of this decision-making today. Our in-house reporters in the courtroom have said that Bill Cosby has taken off his jacket. He's just in a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, looking relaxed for the first time he has.
The bail has just been revoked, so there will be no bail for Bill Cosby. So we assume he'll be taken straight to prison now that this hearing is over. But as Monica was mentioning, he seemed very relaxed in the courtroom and took his jacket off. He was in his shirt sleeves for the first time. But as we see people coming out of the courtroom, there's our reporter John Rollins. Bail has been revoked, and that Bill Cosby, we assume, will be sent straight to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility in Eagleville as we continue to watch these developments unfold here in Norristown.
A few moments ago, earlier, before this hearing, we had seen the women's rights lawyer Gloria Allred leave the courtroom, and she has been there throughout both trials and now through the sentencing, along with Andrea Constand. We have not seen the victim come out of the courtroom yet, but she presumably is still inside the courtroom because she did make a brief statement, and in part of her longer statement that was written and handed over to the judge, she had told the judge she had nightmares because of this and was afraid for any other woman who might suffer if she did not come out. There again in the beige outfit is Gloria Allred, the attorney who brought this case or helped to bring one of the victims forward and was representative of other victims. There's Kevin Steele, the Montgomery County DA, leaving the courtroom now on your left. So again, the major players are coming out of the courtroom, but the impact of Andrea Constand's letter can't be diminished when she said she did not want to go public, but she did it within a week before her statute of limitations was about to run out because she feared for other women who might be victimized by Mr. Cosby, according to her.
Okay, so once again, if you're just joining us, 2:47 this afternoon, Bill Cosby, former Hollywood icon, America's dad, now sentenced 3 to 10 years. Bail has been revoked, so we assume he will be taken to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility in Eagleville. Well, he will await there until he is taken back into the state population. Let's go back outside the courtroom now to Sarah Bloomquist with more on the reaction as this hearing seems to be ending. Sarah, what do you have?
Well, And the judge now coming back and saying not only is he not going to allow bail, but he's revoking bail. That means Bill Cosby is staying in custody. He will be heading first to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility as a stepping stone, perhaps, and then on to state prison. As we look at Andrea Constant now leaving the courtroom, she too sat stoically throughout this proceeding. As John Rollins told us, no reaction from Bill Cosby. He did come into the courtroom this final time with his jacket off, we're told, for the first time, sitting in a white shirt and suspenders. He seemed very relaxed with his sleeves rolled up, as the judge said. Not only was he not even going to consider bail, but he was revoking bail. So now Bill Cosby will remain incarcerated. He will not be coming out, we don't think, this front door any longer. He will be going out a door on the other side of the courthouse and into a sheriff's vehicle and then into the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. John Rollins is back again here with me live. John, you've been running in and out of the courtroom. What just happened?
Right, I think it's frequent flyer miles here. The judge came back after a brief recess and said, cited a Rule 521, I believe D3, I didn't catch all the details, that a defendant who is sentenced to more than 2 years in state prison, or 2 years, does not get an automatic right to appeal.
A right to bail.
A right to bail, rather.
Right.
I'm sorry. He can appeal, but he doesn't get that automatic right to bail, and that's a very big difference. If it was county time, he could. So he says it's at the discretion of the judge, that there is no automatic bail that has to be issued here in this case. So he basically left the issue with the defense and said, look, come back, make a motion if you want to at some point in time, post-sentence motion, and you will request it and we'll revisit it. But at this point, he said, look, this is a very serious sex assault. He has been found guilty of it. He should go on to prison.
We just saw Andrea Constant leave the courtroom. What was her demeanor at these final stages?
Surprisingly, very little reaction overall in that courtroom. It was almost an anticlimax. I think people understood that this was going to be a sentencing. This wasn't like last April when, oh my gosh, we have a verdict, and the verdict was guilty. It was a whole different feel. She did not show a great deal of emotion. One of the other individuals who testified earlier as a possible victim did become a bit emotional, but that really wasn't as much as we might have expected. Mr. Cosby showed very little emotion. In fact, when I went back in after talking with you, we went back in there to listen to the judge. He had taken off his coat. He was there in his shirt sleeves and suspenders and seemed to be just sort of joking with folks, just kind of talking with his lawyers and his public relations spokesperson, but did not seem terribly concerned one way or the other about circumstances.
And we had noticed as well that last lunch break between 12:30 and 1:30, he never even left the courtroom.
Right. He did not leave the courtroom. So, I mean, I can't tell you. I don't know what's going on inside his mind at this point in time, but he did not look like someone who was really terribly concerned or worried about it. Now, the other aspect is the absence of Mrs. Cosby. She apparently did not come to the sentencing. We kind of expected to see Camille Cosby here today. That was not the case, however.
It looks like maybe we have some of the accusers now leaving the courtroom.
Leaving the courtroom. I think what we're going to be running into in the next few minutes is that they will clear the courtroom. At some point in time, we'll be able to see the pool camera come up. They will move Mr. Cosby, presumably in handcuffs, down the hallway. There he will be put into some sort of official vehicle, police vehicles, and taken, not sure where, just as we said earlier.
Right.
Not sure if he's going first to Montgomery County Prison and then on to a state facility, most likely SCI Phoenix, but he will be moved today from this courthouse. There's no doubt about that.
I believe here comes.
Yeah,
I'll get out of the way. These are some of the accusers, along with
many of her clients. You can see, but they are coming out now. A number of them are going to another location here in Norristown in the next 45 minutes or so, and will be answering questions to the press. I believe we do have a unit there and a reporter there as well. We'll also probably see here in a minute future the DA, Kevin Steele, and
John Rollins.
They come out. They're going to go across the street.
We're having a little bit of problems.
News conference there.
John Rollins.
It's not clear where Andrea Constant will be going. She will be going with the district attorney.
John, pardon us. We're sorry. Your microphone is not as loud, so we're going to step in for a moment. Go ahead, Rick.
Remove it. All right. I think we were going to hear a reaction from Gloria Allred and some of the accusers outside the courthouse. But as we look at a live picture once again outside the courtroom, where we're trying to find out if we will see Bill Cosby at all entering, or perhaps he would go out another way.
Here are
Now that
some
we know
of the
this bail's been
constables.
revoked.
Yes, and there's Bill Cosby, who is now found that he is going to be serving 3 to 10 years behind bars, walking out of the courtroom. This is the first time we've seen him. He is in handcuffs as he's being led away by the deputies there, his spokesperson in front of him, and he's surrounded now by Montgomery County officials and officers who are leading him out of the courtroom, presumably into an official vehicle to be driven to one of the jails.
It has been a fall from grace for Bill Cosby, and certainly a surreal picture to see him coming out of the courtroom in handcuffs after being such a Hollywood icon, a notable Temple alumnus, one of the first African-American entertainers to reach such a status of fame and fortune. But Bill Cosby leaving the courtroom in handcuffs on his way to what we believe to be the Montgomery County Correctional Facility in Eagleville. Do we want to go to Chad? Chad is standing by there. Accusers reporter Chad Padelli.
He is outside the facility there. It's about a 5-mile drive, Chad, so we don't know yet when he'll be loading into the vehicle, but presumably now that he's left the courtroom, they won't take very long to load him up and bring him out your way if that's where they decided on.
Yeah, the expectation from the Department of Corrections is that Bill Cosby will be heading from the Montgomery County Courthouse here to Eagleville to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. You can see behind me, you can see some photographers lined up. He will be brought here, pulled into that fenced-in area, then taken inside. Once inside, he will undergo a physical and mental evaluation. He will be asked a long list of questions, like we talked about earlier, if he has any gang affiliations, the normal questions that every inmate undergoes as they enter this facility. He will then be assigned a cell. It could be a one-person cell, it could be a 2-man cell, it could be a 4-man cell, according to people with whom I spoke. But once inside, again, then he will be like any other inmate, and then he will begin his sentence, and eventually...
All right, Chad, we're going to break away from you. Pardon us while we break away. You want to go to Gloria Allred, who's holding a news conference outside of the courthouse. This is attorney. She represented some of the accusers. Let's listen to Gloria Allred right now.
You ready? Yeah. Okay. So this has been a long journey to justice for all of the accusers, particularly for Andrea Constant and for her family. And we respect the fact that they have undergone and endured this journey to justice. The court has imposed a 3 to 5 year term, 3 years after which he can seek parole. This is a very important day. Judgment Day has come. The court has said that its efforts and its decision were based on the guidelines and the law of Pennsylvania and the protection of the public. That there's an undue risk to the public if he was given probation. And given the gravity of the offense and other factors, this was his sentence. So we're glad the Judgment Day has finally come for Mr. Cosby. Mr. Cosby has shown no remorse. And there has been no justice for many of the accusers who were barred from a court by the arbitrary time limits imposed by the statute of limitations. But many of them were brave enough to speak to law enforcement, and some of them were chosen to testify as prior bad act witnesses. So we are very proud of those who cooperated with law enforcement and did what they could do to have a just result. Very quickly, we're going to make a longer statement at the hall. I don't know if you want to say anything about the sentence only and how you feel about it, and then we'll do the victim impact at the hall. This is Shalon Lasha. Shalon is one of my clients. She testified in the criminal case as a prior bad act witness. Go ahead, Shalon.
Well, as everyone knows, I wanted 30 years. But I'm very happy to know that Mr. Cosby will do time in prison, that he is touchable like he touched us unwillingly. This is
okay.
All right.
Good. Thank you.
It's not justice.
All right. Lee Slott-Woodman, who is also a prior bad act witness, again, will give her longer statement at the hall, which we have a copy of for you. But how you feel about the sentence right now?
I'm more emotional than I thought I would be. And all I can say is that this is going to help change the statute of limitations in Nevada. We're going to get it abolished, and we're going to support what's happening here in Pennsylvania. And this is just going to show victims that they can make it through and that there's justice at the end. And hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Okay, we'll see you at the hall right after the DA's press conference. Thank you. Yes. Okay, everyone's invited. And we'll have a longer victory.
Gloria Allred with several of the other accusers of Bill Cosby who have never been allowed to bring their cases to a courtroom because the statute of limitations had run out. But you saw several of them in tears and giving tearful comments about the sentence that he did receive. And ironically, it was in part, many people would say, Mr. Cosby's own words from a deposition in a civil complaint that perhaps led to the trial outcome that we had in April and now to the sentencing. He had admitted in that deposition when Gloria Constand had a civil case against him that he did use pills to get women to have sex with him against their will. So his own words were read in court in April. That is what led in part to the decision to convict him. And now you saw this is video from a few moments ago when he came out of the courtroom in handcuffs. And we're waiting from another angle of the courthouse to show you when he is put into a sheriff's vehicle and taken presumably to Eagleville Correctional Center.
Yeah, this is video that, of course, will be played throughout the country, if not the world. Bill Cosby coming out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He is the first celebrity to go on trial, to be convicted, and now go to jail during the Me Too era. The very first celebrity, and it has been a journey to justice, his accusers will tell you, but certainly it has been a fall from grace for a Hollywood icon, America's dad, a television star, certainly a Philadelphia favorite son, Bill Cosby, heading to prison today.
One of the other accusers mentioned just a moment ago in the rain there during the briefing that she wanted 30 years for Mr. Cosby, and we'll explain that in a moment. But right now, let's listen to
women who make money off of accusing black men of being sexual predators. It is no accident that the prosecutor still worked so close with anti-black and anti-male activist groups who tried to extort $100 million from Dr. Cosby in 2014 and continues to produce racist and sexist publicity against him through the 35 clients. What is going on in Washington today with Judge Kavanaugh is part of that sex war that Judge O'Neill, along with his wife, are a part of. Regarding the psychologist Kristen Dudley, she is a practitioner of mindfulness. This is an Eastern-inspired practice that is controversial in the field of psychology. I have noticed that a number of accusers also produced it, and I believe that AC and Judge O'Neill conspired with this. As you learned today, and we will prove that the DA of Montgomery County used falsified evidence against Dr. Cosby. During both trials, Mr. Steele introduced what he claimed was an accurate recording of conversations between Gianna Constand and Mr. Cosby. After recently being investigated by my associate, Ebony Benson, and her team, they found out that the tapes had been tampered with. About the tapes that Gianna Constand played in the courtroom that she recorded Mr. Cosby on. Mr. Cosby retained a forensic expert to conduct analysis of the recording. The forensic expert has now confirmed that the tape was manipulated in two places. The expert, in her own words, concluded, without question, this is not an authentic recording. Mr. Cosby's defense team is preparing a motion to address Mr. Steele's use of falsified evidence. Mr. Cosby clearly has been denied his right to a fair trial. These injustices must be corrected immediately. How's Mr. Cosby doing? Mr. Cosby doing great. Ebony Benson is going to read a statement from Mrs. Cosby.
Where's Camille? I got it. I'm here to read an official statement from Mrs. Camille Cosby concerning the prosecution's use of falsified evidence. The right to a fair trial is of utmost importance in the American justice system. Prosecutors, as administrators of justice, have a responsibility to protect the innocent and are prohibited from offering any evidence that is untrue. We have now learned and will prove that Bill Cosby was denied his right to a fair trial because the DA of Montgomery County, Kevin Steele, used falsified evidence against him. After being tipped off by a recent online publication that a tape recording Mr. Steele played during trial was doctored, Mr. Cosby retained
obtained a forensic expert to conduct an audio authenticity analysis of the recording. Gianna Constan, the mother of Andrea Constan, had surreptitiously and illegally made the recording of Mr. Cosby in 2005 without his knowledge or consent. That recording was provided to Bruce Castor while he was DA of Montgomery County. Mr. Castor determined that Gianna Constan's surreptitious recording constituted a potential felony under Pennsylvania's law, which required Ms. Constan to obtain Mr. Cosby's consent to the recording. Years later, in 2014, Kevin Steele beat Mr. Castor for DA by unethically attacking him for not prosecuting my husband. He thereafter used the illegal recording in both trials, claiming that it was an authentic recording of the 2005 conversation. Mr. Steele relied heavily on the recording in both trials, ultimately convincing the jury in the second trial to return a verdict of guilty. Earlier this month, on September 12, 2018, an online publication reported that a Montgomery County court official who requested anonymity had revealed that the original recording made by Gianna Constan was doctored and contained information that would exonerate Mr. Cosby. The defense team immediately sent its copy of the recording to a forensic expert who, after extensive analysis, has unequivocally concluded, quote, "This is not a true representation of the original content or conversation. Without question, this is not an authentic recording," end quote. At no time before or during the trial did the DA disclose that the recording was inauthentic, much less that it had been falsified. After the media report surfaced on September 12th, Montgomery County detectives acknowledged and confirmed to the defense team that they could not authenticate the recording and did not know who made the original recording. Mr. Cosby's defense team will be filing a motion seeking immediate relief for the prosecution's use of this falsified evidence. The DA's use of this falsified audio clip at trial is deeply prejudicial, yet it represents just one of many issues that resulted in the denial of Mr. Cosby's right to a fair trial. These egregious injustices must be corrected. Thank you.
Mr. Cosby's doing great, and Mr. Cosby knows that God is watching over him. He knows that these are lies. They persecuted Jesus, and look what happened. Not saying Mr. Cosby is Jesus, but we know what this country has done to black men for centuries. So Mr. Cosby's doing fine. He's holding up well. And everybody who wants to say anything negative, you're a joke as well. Thank you. Did you sexually assault women, Mike?
So we've been listening to Andrew Riots, who is the spokesperson for Bill Cosby, and before him, apparently a spokesperson for Mrs. Cosby, both maybe shedding a little bit of light on what will be the appeals process for Bill Cosby, that I think that there were some aspects of falsified evidence, and that Cosby was denied right to a fair trial. Again, he is appealing his conviction and his sentencing, and we heard a little bit from his defense team right there. Again, as more reaction continues to unfold on this rainy Tuesday outside of the Montgomery County Courthouse, as Bill Cosby was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison.
And we're just recapping, if you're joining us, Bill Cosby has been sentenced to 3 to 10 years, and that was slightly more than was requested by the district attorney. Had asked for 5 to 10, so a little bit less on the one end, but many of our experts are saying they believe Mr. Cosby will serve more than the 3 in their opinion. He is now being processed in the back of the courthouse in Norristown. We are awaiting Mr. Cosby to come out of the courthouse and to go into a deputy's vehicle and be driven 5 miles away to Eagleville, Pennsylvania, the Montgomery County Correctional Facility.
All right, let's go back up there to Eagleville. Well, Action News reporter Chad Berdelli standing by outside the Montgomery County Correctional Facility, where we imagine things will be continuing to unfold there, and the action the ball starting to roll as they await the arrival of Bill Cosby. Chad, huh?
Yeah, just awaiting the arrival of Bill Cosby as he leaves that Montgomery County Courthouse. He'll come here to Eagleville. He will pull into that fenced-in area you see behind me. He will then get out and then will enter the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. This is a county prison, but this is where he will initially begin his sentence. He will go inside. Like we talked about before, he will undergo a physical and mental evaluation to see any physical needs, medications, those sorts of things. He then will be asked a series of questions. When inmates come here, they want to know if they have any gang affiliations, so they're not bunking with other rival gang members, those sorts of questions. After that, he will then be assigned a cell. Now, I'm told there are one-man cells here, there are two-man cells, and there are four-man cells. So it's unclear, if he'll be in a cell with another inmate. I'm told by some people here at the prison facility that if it was their guess, that he would likely have his own cell, considering his age and his celebrity status. But once here, he could serve, possibly days, weeks, even months here before he's assigned to a state prison. Now, we've been talking about that it would likely be SCI Phoenix, which is formerly Graterford, which is just down the road, but that could also not be the case. He could go to any state facility that he's ordered to go to serve out that sentence of 3 to 10 years. But obviously, a lot of people in the media awaiting his arrival here. He is no longer America's dad. He is now an inmate with an inmate number, and will be serving time behind bars, 3 to 10 years for Bill Cosby. I'm live in Eagleville. Chad Prudelli, Channel 6, Action News. Back to you guys.
All right, Chad. Thank you.
They do have to weigh, Chad, before you go, the negative possibilities that Mr. Cosby incarcerated could be a target because of his celebrity, or the positive part of that, which means he might get special treatment inadvertently by other inmates or by the guards. So I know that they're deciding on what facility with that in mind, whether it's a one cell, one man in per cell, or two men in the cell. That's part of the decision making, among many other things. Thank you, Chad.
Okay. And we should reiterate once again that Bill Cosby was officially classified as a sexually violent predator by the judge this morning, following testimony yesterday by a psychologist for the prosecution, who said that Bill Cosby did indeed suffer from some type of medical abnormality. And then this morning, a psychologist for the defense saying that he was no longer a threat to the community. As we once again watched the video just several moments ago, Bill Cosby coming out of the courtroom in handcuffs on his way at some point to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility in Eagleville, where we were just chatting with Chad Prudelli. But again, that classification of sexually violent predator, which has now been leveled against Cosby, means that he will have to undergo mandatory counseling for the rest of his life, and that his whereabouts he will always have to notify authorities of his whereabouts wherever he goes, again, once he serves his time. But this was also part of his sentencing as well, being classified as a sexually violent predator this morning, following a hearing and now the sentencing in which he will serve 3 to 10 years behind bars.
Here is the victim who testified in this case, Andrea Constan, leaving the courtroom. She's a Canadian woman who had come to this area to work at Temple University in their athletics department, helping with many of the teams. And she said at the time that she admired Mr. Cosby. He was on the board at Temple University. He had also attended Temple, and she really respected and admired him, had, sort of stardust in her eyes about him. She had been invited by him to his home in Elkins Park and had gone there in 2004, expecting to use him, as it were, in her career as a mentor, to give her advice to advance her own career to the next level as a member of the Temple faculty. And she said she was surprised at what occurred at that time, and that has been the source of the situation that led to today's downward fall for Mr. Cosby. Many people would say that had he not invited her there, certainly this trial would never have occurred, because many people, the other accusers, time had run out, and this was the one trial that still had just a few days, if not a week, to go before Andrea Constan, the victim, decided to proceed.
At some point, we expect to hear from Montgomery County DA Kevin Steele, but as we do, this is another vantage point outside of the Montgomery County Courthouse, where we expect Bill Cosby to be brought out of here again in handcuffs, put into one of the police cruisers and taken up to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility in Eagleville. And as we wait, again, it is worth noting that from what we understand from our reporters who were in the courtroom, he remained stoic throughout the morning, and even when his sentencing was read, even taking off his jacket and his shirt sleeves and suspenders, seeming very relaxed, following the judge deciding that he must serve anywhere from 3 to 10 years behind bars. Let's go back to Action News reporter Sarah Bloomquist, who is outside the courthouse with more reaction to today's sentencing. Sarah.
What an afternoon, Rick. As the sentence came down, the sky opened up. It's already been something of a circus atmosphere out here throughout the first trial, the second trial, and now this sentencing phase. And then we just had this incredible downpour here as everybody was leaving the courtroom. So it did make it difficult to hear what Gloria Allred said and what Andrew Wyatt said as they were leaving. But we do know, you heard those statements. This has been something this afternoon. We've been waiting throughout the entire afternoon to hear what the sentence would be. This is a 2-day hearing that began yesterday. Again, the state recommended 22 to 36 months. Bill Cosby will now go to prison for 3 years to 10 years. And that process is beginning right now. He will, we believe, head to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility and then on to state prison. But when and where, we don't know, and it could be some time until we do. There is an appeals process that is going to begin, will begin immediately. And he could remain here in Montgomery County while that appeals process is underway. Again, the defense team did ask for bail immediately following the sentencing, and the judge recessed for a minute and came back and quoted a law and said, no, that is just not possible. He has made it clear throughout this case that Bill Cosby, he will not treat differently. He said not based on who you were or who you are. That his celebrity and, the fact that he's known as America's dad did not figure into this. He was treated like any other person convicted of a sex crime. He is a sexually violent predator, a designation that legal experts say is like the Scarlet A. It's a branding, and it will be with him. He will have to undergo counseling monthly. He will, any community he is in, this is post-release, he will have to be notified. He will even have to communicate with state police in all likelihood anytime he moves around from one city to another, even just for overnight. Cosby talked a little bit with the judge about that in open court, and he did become, from our reporter John Rollins saying, he did become a little bit testy at times. The courtroom was quiet throughout. There were no outbursts. You'll remember at the end of the retrial, the trial that ended on April 26th, there was an outburst from Mr. Cosby. He yelled out an expletive. He sat stoically today, his jacket off.
Sarah, we're going to interrupt you. Sarah, sorry to interrupt you. Mr. Cosby is being led out of the courthouse now into a vehicle. The deputies are there escorting him into the vehicle. He's still in handcuffs. Part of the view is blocked, but we're showing you now as he enters an official county vehicle and will be going now to probably the Montgomery County Correctional Facility, gently putting him into that vehicle surrounded by deputies. And we do want to go back now to Chad Perdelli. And Chad, Mr. Cosby's attorneys, specifically Attorney Joseph Green, had asked in court that the judge not, in his opinion, be swayed by the protests and the activists who were in and outside of the courtroom. And in his opinion, this defense attorney was afraid perhaps that would sway the judge. And he also tried the angle that Mr. Cosby is 81 years old and partially or legally blind, hoping that either one of those might, in fact, spare Mr. Cosby any time behind bars. But in fact, we're seeing as he's led now into that vehicle, that is not the case, and he is on his way perhaps to where you're located, Chad. Can you hear me, Chad?
Well, yeah, he's doing what lawyers do. He's doing some legal maneuvering, trying to get the best possible situation for his client, Bill Cosby. But Bill Cosby is coming here to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. He's expected here within the next hour as he makes his way from the courthouse. He will then be pulled in here behind this fenced-in area and then will be taken in. Now, talking to some actually inmates that just were released, they say the intake process can sometimes take up to 36 hours. They don't think that'll be the case, though, obviously with Bill Cosby, but he will go into intake. And then once in intake, he will undergo, like I said, a physical and mental evaluation, and then will be assigned a cell. It could be, like we talked about earlier, a one-man cell, a two-man cell, a four-man cell. Chances are with Bill Cosby, considering his celebrity and considering his age, like you talked about, it'll be a one-man cell. But then he will serve a portion of his sentence, likely only a week or a few weeks here at this county facility. Then he will be moved to that state prison facility that he was sentenced to for 3 to 10 years. Which facility that will be is unclear. It'll be until he's assigned that facility. So much talk has been that it'll be over at the new facility there, the Phoenix facility, just a few miles down the road, formerly Graterford, but that may not be the case. But we are awaiting Bill Cosby to arrive here at the county prison to begin his sentence after being sentenced on those 3 counts of sexual assault. So as he gets here, we're going to be going over there towards the fence to see if we can capture him, to see if he will say anything as he begins this prison sentence.
All right, Chad, before we let you go, I just wanted to clarify for viewers who might not realize, originally Mr. Cosby was convicted of 3 counts of sexual assault, each of which could have had up to 10 years. That would be 30 years behind bars. But several days ago, both sides, the defense and the prosecution, agreed to merge those 3 into one charge, one count against him, so that the maximum would be 10 years. One of the victims had said she wanted him to get 30 years, and that's what she was referring to. But in fact, the maximum as of today was only up to 10 years, which is partially what the judge gave him. Thank you, Chad.
Chad, stand by there in Eagleville, and we will be coming to you as Bill Cosby starts to make his trek towards prison. But right now, we are back in Norristown. We're awaiting a news conference from Montgomery County District Attorney Kevin Steele. There is the podium. As soon as he takes that podium, as soon as he addresses the mic, we will come back and see what the prosecution has to say regarding today's sentencing of Bill Cosby. But in the meantime, back outside to the courthouse, let's go to Sarah Bloomquist, who's been continuing to get reaction and watch events unfold following today's dramatic conclusion to the sentencing hearing, which obviously began yesterday, Sarah, and they recessed early and then ended today after Bill Cosby was officially classified as a sexually violent predator.
That's right. Judge Stephen O'Neill said from the outset that he wanted this to be a 2-day proceeding, and it was exactly that. We did have some testimony this morning from a defense witness, a psychologist, who said he had a 3-hour conversation with Bill Cosby about to try to assess whether he would reoffend, and he thought, to his mind, he's 81 years old, he's lost his vision, that was unlikely. However, that witness also told the court he had not reviewed any of the testimony that came from the courtroom, which sort of surprised even the prosecution. And in the end, the judge came back and decided to designate Bill Cosby as a sexually violent predator. That was really the first phase of that sentencing that happened today. Then there was a break, and they all came back after that break. Bill Cosby choosing not to give what they call an allocution, a statement on his own behalf. It would have been difficult to do, given that he has not taken any responsibility publicly or shown any remorse throughout the years now that this case has been prosecuted against him. Also, he's now looking at the appeals process, so he would not want to be saying anything incriminating in the court as he moves to look toward appeal, which we are hearing from our legal experts could take years. And in fact, our one legal expert said they may keep him here in Montgomery County throughout the duration of that appeals process. But what's more likely is that he will get assessed by the state prison system. They will find a facility that works best. Kevin Steele has told the court over the past 2 days that there are state prisons that have medical facilities that can accommodate an 81-year-old man who's lost his vision and needs assistance getting around. So in the future, he will very likely be moved to one of those facilities. Things beginning to quiet here a little bit at the courthouse as the defendant, now the convicted criminal, Bill Cosby, has left the building, and we are now awaiting that news conference from District Attorney Kevin Steele. It will be interesting to see if Andrea Constand is at that news conference. She could be. Her parents could be. They have been very outspoken as to how grateful they are to DA Kevin Steele for continuing to plot on. There was the initial retrial. He didn't give up and retried this case, getting that conviction back on April 26th of this year. The last time he had this news conference at the end of that trial, it lasted about an hour. It went on for some time. He stayed and answered a lot of questions. This, of course, a victory for him. Many were critical of his attempt to retry this case, to go back and try to get this conviction of Bill Cosby, but he stayed with it, and he will be addressing the media shortly and undoubtedly talking about his admiration for Andrea Constand. Yesterday, he teared up when he talked about her coming back again and again, telling the same story and her willingness to pursue this, to see this to the end. And we are at the end, at least for this chapter, in this case that has gone on for years now, but there are still likely years to go as they look toward the appeal process.
Sarah, for viewers who may not realize, Mr. Cosby was born in Philadelphia, grew up in public housing, and then rose through the ranks of stand-up comedy, went on to have an incredible career, is worth about $400 million reportedly, but now faces several other legal machinations, if you will. You referred to it, where other victims who are suing him in civil court may in fact go after some of that fortune. And at the very least, he's on his second legal team here. He had one legal team for the first trial, a second legal team for the retrial. Now he may be facing obviously much steeper legal fees again as all these civil trials play out. So it's certainly not the last time perhaps that we would see Mr. Cosby come to a courthouse and face some of these accusers on the civil side. They're not allowed to file criminal charges, but the civil cases are still going forward.
And as we once again look at the video of Bill Cosby coming out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Sarah, you can expound on this. You and both John Rollins in the courtroom when the sentencing came down. He had an opportunity to speak, to give a statement to the judge, but he denied. There was no allocution, as they call it. There were also no character witnesses. How do defense attorneys feel that played in today's decision to sentence Bill Cosby to 3 to 10 years?
Well, the judge had to look at everything, and yesterday there was a lot of talk about what the court calls aggravating and mitigating circumstances. The aggravating, of course, being things like the other accusers. We know at this trial there were 5 that came forward, but as Monica is talking about as well, some 60 women have come forward with stories alleging sexual abuse by Bill Cosby over many, many years, and there are court cases still going on. Cosby has also sued some of them for defamation. That's going to be more difficult to prove now, given that he has been designated as this violent sexual predator. It's hard to call those women a liar when the court is saying, no, this is who he is, and this is what we are concerned about, and we need to protect the public from this man. As far as what they call the mitigating circumstances, they brought in his age. They brought in his physical ailments. There was discussion about his philanthropy. He gave back to many charities over the years. We know he was deeply involved with Temple University as well over the years. And they brought all that in, talked about his upbringing, growing up in public housing in South Philadelphia, rising through the ranks to become this really American treasure, America's dad, a comedian that made everybody laugh. But it didn't matter in the end because the judge looked at the testimony and what these women had to say. And in the end, Bill Cosby will be going to prison for 3 to 10 years. We'll wait to see what happens on the appeal.
Team, as well as court watchers, will be debating for years to come. Would it have helped perhaps today or even in the trial if Mr. Cosby had taken the stand, if his wife Camille had taken the stand, if his daughters on his behalf, if some of his business associates, if anyone had come on the stand to say, you know, what a terrific person he was, for example, would that have helped? And that will be the debate for weeks and months to come, no doubt, as they reassess what happened here and what went wrong on the defense side.
you know, this was the judge to decide, and he listened to the testimony. The court experts thought all along it would have been next to impossible for Bill Cosby. Is them leaving now? Yeah, there goes the Bill Cosby and the police escort. So in any event, it would have been next to impossible for Bill Cosby to take the stand. He never, at any point during this proceedings, took any ownership of this or any responsibility for any of it. Never once showed any remorse. And in fact, his team and even his own wife went after the judge. She had called this mob justice publicly and asked for an ethics investigation of this judge. The experts say the judge would not have weighed that. He would have been aware of it. Of course, it's in the back of his mind, but he would not have weighed that in his decision. But that nobody thought that was going to help Bill Cosby. Here, the fact that his legal team was so aggressive in its attack on Judge O'Neill, who made this decision today and decided to go even inch the sentence a little beyond what the state board had recommended he get. They recommended 22 to 36 months. Now he's looking at 3 to 10 years in state prison. This will be, it's being now watched, not here, or across the country and around the world, this being really the first celebrity trial in this Me Too movement that began last fall. This sends a signal. This sends a sign that celebrity doesn't protect anybody, that they will not be treated differently. The judge made that clear today. He would not treat Bill Cosby any differently than anybody else who's been convicted of not just sex crimes, but what is being labeled a violent, predatory sex crime.
And now, Sarah, thank you. We're going to go to another camera and show you the county sheriff's vehicles, the entourage that is now taking Mr. Cosby to Eagleville Prison. They've just pulled up in front of that building, and presumably we'll see Mr. Cosby being led out of the back of the vehicle there. Again, there has been much debate about whether Mr. Cosby's family should have come to the courthouse and been there emotionally supporting him, but his wife did have a statement read by her. And Mr. Cosby has always alleged that it was consensual sex. He never said he didn't have sex with some of these women, specifically Ms. Constant, that he did admit to adultery, which his wife had forgiven him of, she said, throughout the years. But he said it was always consensual. The jury in April didn't buy it, and the judge today didn't believe it either. Now Mr. Cosby being led out of the vehicle.
That's right. We just looked at the entourage. There's Bill Cosby once again in handcuffs, being led into the facility to be processed, where he will be again taken to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. And it has been quite a journey where Bill Cosby's fall from grace, and so many women coming forward to say that, yes, they too were sexually assaulted. Of course, the statute of limitations prevented them from seeking any kind of criminal trial against Cosby, which made this case involving Andrea Constant so eye-watching and gaining such national headlines, because once again, Bill Cosby was the first celebrity to be tried, convicted, and now imprisoned, the first celebrity during the Me Too era and during this climate. It had so many people watching this case. Let's go now to District Attorney Kevin Steele with his reaction to the sentencing of Bill Cosby.
Right there. You guys come on over. Come over on this side. Okay. Sorry about the rain. I guess it's good that Judge Del Ricci said no press conferences on the stairs, so we're in here. It's been a long journey to get here, and today justice was served. It's been a long time coming, but it arrived when a convicted felon named William H. Cosby Jr. left the courtroom in handcuffs, headed off to state prison for his crimes. It's been a long wait for our victim, Andrea Constant, as it has for the other women who have endured similar sexual assaults and rapes at the hands of the defendant. It has also been a long road for our prosecution team, which has worked hard to get justice for Andrea Constant, overcoming every legal hurdle that was thrown at us and a succession of defense attorneys along the way. For decades, the defendant has been able to hide his true self and hide his crimes using his fame and fortune. He's hidden behind a character created, Dr. Cliff Huxtable. It was a seminal character on TV, and so was the family, but it was fiction. Before Bill Cosby became a convicted felon, taken away in handcuffs to begin paying for his crimes, a lot of people believed that that's who he was. But we know otherwise. He used his acting skills and that endearing TV personality to win over his victims and then keep them silent about what he did to them. So now finally, Bill Cosby has been unmasked, and we have seen the real man as he is headed off to prison. So throughout this investigation and prosecution, we have treated the defendant like any other defendant. Our office prosecutes approximately 9,500 cases a year, and as prosecutors, it's our job to follow the evidence wherever it leads and to whomever it leaves and file charges accordingly, and then follow through on the prosecution of those crimes. That's what we do every day. We do the right thing, and that's what we did in this case. We do the right thing because someone who has a lot of money, someone who is famous, someone who can get a lot of attention all over the world just by showing up someplace to eat, shouldn't be given a pass for their crimes and allowed to walk free because he and his defense team are going to make it hard to prosecute him or because it will be expensive to prosecute him. Every victim deserves justice. Once that jury said guilty, and then said guilty, and then said guilty to all three charges of aggravated indecent assault, the sentencing guidelines indicated that the defendant should go to prison. We argued for the stiffest sentence to reflect that egregious natures of the crime. Giving women drugs so he can then have no resistance. It is a very serious crime, and the judge spoke of that today. Doesn't matter that he is only now being prosecuted and called to account for those crimes. In the eyes of this court, he's a convicted felon and shouldn't be given a pass. So I'm pleased that Judge O'Neill followed the sentencing guidelines, handed down a fair and significant sentence that reflects the severity of Cosby's crimes and the lifelong impact on Andrea. So let me talk about Andrea for a moment here. I can't say enough about her. We are all better off because she is in our lives. You've heard about how this assault changed her life. She has been through an ordeal these past 14 years, and she has been solid and steadfast. To put herself out like this for years in front of a worldwide audience is extremely difficult for anyone. She's been a rock. She's done the right thing over and over and over again. She went to the police and started this investigation. She told us she would cooperate with the prosecution long after she thought this ordeal had been put behind her. And she could have stayed home in Canada, and she could have lived a quiet life. But she knew it was important to see that justice was served. And we had some time when we were waiting for the jury the first time around. And so some of you know I coach a little basketball, so I was trying to get tips from Andrea on this. It's not every day that I get to be around a person of this caliber of talent in the basketball arena. And when we had a pretty good indication of where that jury was going, I went to her and asked her what she wanted to do. Sticking with the basketball aspect, she did one of these and said always follow through, and she did, and it has led us to where we are today. She agreed to seek justice after that first trial ended, and we knew what we were going to go through again, and she never wavered. So we reached justice. We got to hear from the jury guilty verdicts, and right there, standing with Andrea and her family, were the other courageous victims. I'm overwhelmed by the number of women who are willing to go through this process with us, who are willing to testify at trial, telling their stories about being drugged and sexually assaulted or raped by Bill Cosby. I especially applaud the 6 witnesses who did have a chance to face the defendant in court and tell the jury and the world what happened to them. The courage of Kelly Johnson, Heidi Thomas, Shalon Lasha, Janice Dickinson, Janice Baker Kinney, and Lisa Lott Lublin was tremendous. They also endured significant victim shaming, which should never happen in a courtroom, but anybody that was there saw it. And I hope this trial and seeing the defendant brought to justice helped each of them and all of the other victims heal in their own way. And I want to also thank her attorneys, Dolores Triani and Bibi Kivitz, who were with her every step of the way with this, as well as this prosecution team. And it was nice to have Thunder and Lightning back with me here, and Stu Ryan and Kristen Fedden are consummate professionals, and have been with me the whole way, and I can't say how appreciative I am of that, and also their talents, which you again got to see in court when Stu had another chance at an expert there. Our appellate unit, and you got to meet Tracy in this case when she argued the constitutionality of it, and did a marvelous job, and we're so happy that she's part of our team. Caroline Goldstein next to her. Caroline has been the quiet one behind us, helping us each step of the way, and working diligently to all hours. Adrian Jappy next to her, the assistant chief for our appellate unit, and Bob Fallon, who's our chief of appeals. These folks, when all this stuff keeps hitting and these motions keep coming, they're the reason we're so prepared each and every day to face any challenge that came before us. There's also a number of the victim advocates, and these folks are there every day to support the victims and do so much to help them walk this walk. Our detective bureau, they're amazing, and they work and they work and they work and helped us to get through every one of those challenges. Chief Fry is here behind Bibi. The Cheltenham Police Department is an exceptional police department. It is led by an exceptional man. He's following in the shoes of John Norris, who we also owe a debt of gratitude to, but these folks are the best, and our law enforcement community is an amazing group of people. So there's been a lot of talk about this case and connecting it to movements across the country, and I understand that there's a larger societal context of this case that may have been helped to be advanced, the rights of victims to come forward, the lengthening of statute of limitations, or empowering people to come forward and report to law enforcement that they have been a victim of crime. All good outcomes. But I have to say that since we first charged the defendant on December 30th of 2016, this defendant has been treated like every other defendant that our office prosecutes, and there's about 9,500 of them a year, as I said, adult cases. We followed our standard practice, and we kept our eye on the ball. And what was important, it was that getting justice for the victim in this case, Andrea Constant. And so I stand before all of you pleased that we have done that, pleased that the defendant was convicted, pleased that he was finally sentenced in a court of law, and that we've closed the book on that chapter. So before we wrap up and take questions, and I think Bibi asked to say a couple words, I wanted to share with you that Jennifer Storm, who is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's victim advocate, has been in touch with the many other victims, and the ones that have come forward here to say that they too were victims of this defendant. And as you know, Pennsylvania law limits the other victim's role in the sentencing hearing that we just went through, but it is important that they have a voice. It's important that they be allowed to tell the stories of what happened to them for their own healing. So Jen has organized a press event, and she's going to give everybody time between now and when that starts in a short while over at Xavier Hall, 410 East Erie Street here in Norristown. It's just a few blocks away, so that the many other victims will be there. And it's my understanding many of them would like to speak at that point. And so I'd encourage anybody to go over to them. Bibi, you asked to say something, and then I'll take questions.
I requested 30 seconds because I wasn't fortunate enough to be here for the verdict. We just wanted to extend our heartfelt thanks to the prosecution team. Kevin Steele, Kristen Fedden, Stu Ryan, the detectives, everyone who has worked on this case has just been so wonderful. Dolores and I are ex-prosecutors, so we recognize brilliance in them. And this team was not only compassionate to the victim, but they were also so tenacious in their preparation of the case. Just a marvelous job, and we're so appreciative. I have to say one word about Andrea. We have represented Andrea now for almost 14 years. She is an incredible person. She has gone through this process and the many processes with both courage and grace. And she's just a marvelous person, and we've been fortunate to represent her. The final thing I wanted to say is, for us, we get to close this chapter of our book, fictional book, but we get to close it today. For other victims, they're just now beginning to write their own books, and hopefully they will feel safer and more free to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, from my purse. All right, we'll take questions. Yes, sir.
David Spence, CBS 3. Will Ms. Constant be speaking at all today? I just want to know how you feel today now that this is finally here.
No. Thanks.
Yes, what do you think was critical at getting the conviction? It's been 34 months. We had a mistrial in the first trial. We were able to be successful in the second trial. Looking back now, what do you think was critical at getting the conviction of Mr. Cosby?
Well, there's so many aspects of the evidence that we had that we felt was very strong. Of course, his own words, which basically spelled out what he did, and the jury heard that. And I think another aspect that I would be remiss if I didn't talk about is Dr. Ziv, and the better understanding of victims and what they go through, that she was able to tell the jury and discuss with them, and I don't know whether that had an impact on the jury or not, but we felt that it was powerful evidence to have in the case. So there's a number of things in this case that were very, very strong and continue to be strong, and I'm confident on where we are on the case.
How would you characterize seeing Mr. Cosby in handcuffs? I know you left the courtroom, but you might have seen pictures. I mean, it was pretty significant seeing him walk out of court in handcuffs. What does that all mean?
Look, it's not a cause for celebration, and we take very seriously the taking of somebody's liberty. But I will not apologize for our job. And our job is to separate the predators from the good people in our community. And that happened today. And that happened when he was escorted out of the courtroom by the sheriffs in handcuffs. Next. Everybody's too hot, and so you have no other questions?
If I can, if nobody else wants to take it, if I can.
Okay.
I work for an African-American radio station. There have been many in the African-American community who felt that this is an unjust prosecution. How do you respond to that you have put an icon in the eyes of many African-Americans in jail?
This is no different from any other case and any other defendant that prosecutes. We simply follow the evidence where it takes us, and it doesn't matter who they are. And I think that's really important, because if somebody's wealth or fame or who they were detractors from following that evidence, then justice wouldn't be getting done in cases. It's been an interesting start to a time as district attorney here. I had to prosecute the chief law enforcement officer in the state, the attorney general. And we didn't hear that during this. We prosecute where the evidence takes us, and that was done in this case. And when Judge Rubino released the deposition and said that this is perhaps criminal, we're obligated to look at that, and we did, and we worked through the case, and we got to where we are today. So.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about. Of course, they've already started their appeal process, and just wanted to give you a chance to address what they're saying about the tape being doctored, and whether or not you want to comment on that.
I will. I'll just say I'm very confident in the place we are. If that's what they've got, it's beyond a Hail Mary, which I said in court. And this is nothing new. Maybe it's new for these defense attorneys, but this was something that got discussed back in 2006 and was part of the deposition that it's not a full tape, because she turned it on. The tape with Gianna Constant taped. You heard it in court.
Okay.
And I think everybody recognizes that it didn't start at the beginning, because she had to turn on. And anybody that was there and saw it saw the microcassette that she used to do that. So if that's where they are and that's where we're going, I'm confident on where we are.
Could you go through the process of what happens to Mr. Cosby now, where he goes, how long he'll stay there,
Sure.
and then where he goes next?
Sure. So today he got escorted from the courtroom. He starts at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. That's in Eagleville. From there, he goes to actually a new state correctional institution called Phoenix, which was Graterford before, which is also in our county. And then he'll be there and get designated, I believe, from there to one of the state institutions throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And our Department of Corrections does a terrific job with things, and they'll look at safety issues, and they'll look at needs and act accordingly.
You asked for 5 years, between 5 and 10. The judge gave you 3 to 10. A little lower than you wanted, but I guess overall you're happy with the verdict.
So the judge, I believe, considered the guidelines, and that guideline was at the top end of the standard range. On the front end of the case, I think it's very important to note the tail end of the case. So he sentenced him to a maximum term on the tail end, which is 10 years. And that's important in that, after 3 years of incarceration, somebody would be eligible for parole. But victims get a say in that now. And that has come, over time, and they get a say. And so this is going to be a process that goes through, but he could serve every day of 10 years at this point, and that's the sentence that he was given.
How much money do you want to get back? They had talked about the cost of prosecution I know at one point it was like $250,000 for one. So how much total money are you asking for Cosby to pay back to the county?
So I guess there's different entities through this. So you have the court costs, and that will be put in by the court. Sheriffs can put their costs in. We put the costs for the witness travel and the hotels and the expert fees, which amounted to about $43,000. And so we asked that be recouped by our office. So, and that was signed by the judge today, and I'm not sure how the rest of those will be handled, but there's different costs that come with it, and he also got a fine, and the judge gave him a maximum fine. Maybe that's not a big deal to most folks, but $25,000 was a maximum fine in the case. Anybody else?
Mr. Steele, I'm wondering what actually is the legal process? I'm Dominic Patton from Deadline Hollywood. Obviously, they're going to appeal, so where does this go now, and what is the involvement of your office in this going forward? Because they've already started talking about the state Supreme Court.
We got a little ways to get to before we get to the state Supreme Court. So they have an opportunity to file post-trial motions. They don't have to do that. And then after that, they'll file an appeal to the Superior Court, and that's going to be handled by our office. And I've said it before, I will put this appellate team up against anybody. We have been directed and given great guidance in this case throughout by all of them. Bob Fallon, Adrian Jappy, these two have been with me, and we've been together for a long time, and they are beyond excellent. And I am so proud of them, and that'll be the process. All right, everybody, thank you very much, and I hope many of you can get down to hear from some of the other victims.
We have been listening in to District Attorney Kevin Steele, Shari Williams alongside Brian Taff here as we prepare for Action News at 4 o'clock. But an extraordinary day as we listened in from the prosecution side, and also, of course, those who were putting on their case for Andrea Constand, the DA there, very pleased, saying justice served today.
We've been hearing a lot of voices connected to this trial over the last several months, which, of course, dominated so much of the cultural conversation across America. We expect to hear in the coming moments from some of the other accusers here who have said Bill Cosby also assaulted them. Remember, none of their accusations have made it to trial at this point. We believe Walter Perez is standing by live at that scene right now, where we expect that news conference to get underway any moment. Walter, tell us what you expect to hear there today.
Brian and Shari, once again, as you mentioned, we're waiting for a gathering to begin here at Xavier Hall in Norristown. It's being described as a community impact session with women who say they, too, have been victimized by Bill Cosby. The organization that's heading this whole thing up is the Pennsylvania Office of the Victim Advocate. Leaders from that office are here. Gloria Allred is here as well. Some of the women are here as well at this point, but they haven't begun at this point. We're told impact statements will be shared by the women who do come here. And, of course, this comes after a judge ruled that Bill Cosby is a sexually violent offender before sentencing him to 3 to 10 years in prison here in Pennsylvania. A stunning fall from grace from the man once known as America's dad, a beloved entertainer, of course, in the U.S. for the past several decades in the U.S. and around the world as well. Now, since 2005, when Andrea Constand first came forward with her allegations and went to authorities with those allegations, more than 60 women have accused Cosby of sexual misconduct, and once again, several of those women will speak here today. So we're waiting for that gathering to begin here at Xavier Hall in Norristown. It's being described as a community impact session with women who say they too have been victimized by Bill Cosby. This gathering is organized by the Pennsylvania Office of the Victim Advocate, and we're told impact statements will be shared by the women who speak here expectedly within the next half hour or so. When it happens, we'll bring it live on 6 ABC. Reporting live from Norristown, Walter Perez, Channel 6 Action News. Back to you.
Okay, Walter, thank you.
Walter, can you stick around there for one moment, if you might? We did hear from some of the alleged accusers, or rather the accusers, who alleged that Bill Cosby assaulted them as well. For briefly outside the courtroom today, we know it was pouring rain, so they've moved this event inside. But some of them said that, yes, this is justice for them as well. And we know that most of them, if not all of them, don't have any legal recourse. From what you're hearing and what you've heard so far today, do you expect that most of them will say this is, in fact, the justice they've been seeking?
At this point, it's hard to say, Brian, because we're waiting for them to come out. This has been organized for a while. It wasn't something they came up with today, of course. It's something that's been organized for a couple of days at this point. So when they come out, they will have, as I mentioned, impact statements that we'll read. Gloria Allred is here as well. She will speak to start things off. But overall, at this point, we're not sure exactly what will be said. But once it happens, we'll have it live here on 6ABC.
Okay, Walter, thank you very much. We'll hear much more from you in the coming minutes here on 6ABC. Some 60-plus women are going to have their voice heard by at least a few in that room today. And as we said, we do expect they'll say justice has been served, at least so far.
The first trial ending in a hung jury. Now, of course, the second trial came. He was found guilty. And now today, of course, we get the sentencing from this judge, Bill Cosby, to spend 3 to 10 years in prison. And that process already underway on this Tuesday afternoon as this, of course, breaking news across the country. All eyes right here on the Delaware Valley as this develops. Action News at 4 starts right now.
Action News, Delaware Valley's leading news program.
Breaking right now, Bill Cosby let out of a Montgomery County courtroom in handcuffs. The 81-year-old just sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, starting immediately. It is Thursday afternoon. I'm Brian Taft. Tuesday.
And I'm Shari Williams. The big story on Action News is the prison sentence for the man known as America's Dad, who was convicted of sexual assault.
Action News, of course, has been following this story all afternoon. Our team coverage starts this afternoon now with Action News reporter John Rollins at the DA's office in Norristown. John, that's been an active scene today.
Well, it has been. We're down the street a bit, but yes, it was very active all through the court complex here in Montgomery County. I think the overall narrative today from both the judge, the prosecution, and the accusers of Mr. Cosby is that this was the day of judgment for Bill Cosby. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in state prison. This was for the indecent assault of Andrea Constand. That was back in 2004. Now, Cosby was arrested. It was a rather controversial arrest at the end of 2015 for that crime. He was had a hung jury in the first trial. That was 2017, and then 2018, the retrial and a conviction. The man pushing all of that prosecution, even when it was controversial, and certainly when it was less controversial with many people after there was a conviction, was Montgomery County DA Kevin Steele, and we heard from him a short time ago.
For decades, the defendant has been able to hide his true self and hide his crimes using his fame and fortune. He's hidden behind a character created, Dr. Cliff Huxtable. It was a seminal character on TV, and so was the family, but it was fiction. Before Bill Cosby became a convicted felon taken away in handcuffs to begin paying for his crimes, a lot of people believed that that's who he was.
Well, Cosby said nothing after the sentencing today. He did not visibly react at the sentencing inside the courtroom. His legal team, though, will appeal his conviction. They have made that quite clear, and take other legal maneuvers. They were unsuccessful today in getting bail, although Andrew Wyatt, his spokesperson today after the sentencing, alleged that the prosecution had doctored certain audio recordings that were used in the conviction and promised this effort by the legal team.
Mr. Cosby's defense team is preparing a motion to address Mr. Steele's use of falsified evidence. Mr. Cosby clearly has been denied his right to a fair trial. These injustices must be corrected immediately.
Wyatt maintains the prosecution of Bill Cosby was biased and driven by the mass media.
This has been the most racist and sexist trial in the history of the United States. Dr. Cosby has been one of the greatest civil rights leaders in the United States for over the last 50 years. He has also been one of the greatest educators of men and boys over the last 50 years.
Well, that was Mr. Wyatt, Andrew Wyatt, who is Mr. Cosby's spokesperson. Mr. Cosby, in the meantime, was taken out in handcuffs from the Montgomery County Courthouse today. His travel plans at this point, apparently he is going to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility in Eagleville. There he will be somehow transferred or transited to a SCI Phoenix. That's the new prison that was built in the Graterford area of Montgomery County. Eventually, Mr. Cosby will be assigned to another site somewhere in the state prison system, one which apparently has a facility for both elderly prisoners and those prisoners who have physical handicaps. That's the situation right now. Live in Norristown, John Rollins, Channel 6 Action News. Back to you guys.
Okay, John, more on that in just a moment. Thank you. As part of the sentencing phase, Andrea Constand submitted a 5-page letter to the judge. Her victim impact statement details her life before and after the sexual assault, saying she's been unable to shake the pain and anguish. She says life as she knew it came to an abrupt halt on that night, January 2004, when she was just 30 years old. In her letter, she says Cosby, quote, took my beautiful, healthy young spirit and crushed it. He robbed me of my health and vitality, my open nature, my trust in myself and others.
Our coverage of this breaking story, it continues right now with Action News' Sarah Bloomquist, who is outside of the courthouse in Norristown.
And Sarah, we know Cosby's other accusers were not part of this case, but they were there all along, waiting for this decision from the judge today.
They made their presence known throughout the first trial, the retrial, and then this sentencing phase over the past couple of days. 3 to 10 years in prison for Bill Cosby. Now, during this last trial, 6 women testified, including Andrea Constand. The 5 others were considered prior bad acts. The judge certainly weighed their testimony and believed them. The defense tried to get the judge to consider Cosby's age, the fact that he's lost his vision, but the testimony of those 6 women, given this sentence, outweighed those mitigating factors. In all, a total of 60 women have come forward over the years accusing Cosby of sex crimes. Some are represented by famed attorney Gloria Allred. She, too, has been here at the courthouse in Norristown throughout the trials and this sentencing proceeding. Here was her reaction to the sentence this afternoon.
This is a very important day. Judgment Day has come. The court has said that its efforts and its decision were based on the guidelines and the law of Pennsylvania and the protection of the public. That there's an undue risk to the public if he was given probation. And given the gravity of the offense and other factors, this was his sentence.
And this is video now right outside the courtroom just after the proceedings ended. It is Andrea Constand hugging former supermodel Janice Dickinson, who is also accusing Bill Cosby. Those cases all in civil court. Constand's case, the only case to reach a criminal court. These other accusers are infinitely grateful to her. She represents and got the outcome that they were hoping for. Bill Cosby now headed to prison, and we expect to hear from some of those other accusers and Gloria Allred at any time now here in Norristown. Live in Norristown, I'm Sarah Bloomquist, Channel 6 Action News.
Okay, Sarah, thank you. We turn now to Action News reporter Chad Pradelli, who's live in Eagleville.
And Chad, that's the Montgomery County Correctional Facility behind you, where we saw Bill Cosby arrive in handcuffs and shackles not long ago.
Yeah, he arrived here about 30 minutes ago, Brian, and he was gingerly escorted inside the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. He was in handcuffs. At one point, I screamed out, "Do you have any comment, Mr. Cosby?" He yelled out, "Hey." That was the extent of it. Then he was taken inside the facility. He will now be in intake. It's called intake, and that is where he will be processed to enter this facility. He will undergo a series of questions on his physical questions, a mental testing, and other list of questions as he enters this facility. They need to see what sort of medications he may be on, what sort of gangs. Obviously, he's not involved in any gangs unless you're talking about celebrity status. But then he'll be assigned a cell, either a 1-man, a 2-man, or a 4-man cell. And just a short time ago, District Attorney Kevin Steele talked about what's next for Cosby because he won't be staying here.
Today, he got escorted from the courtroom. He starts at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. That's in Eagleville. From there, he goes to actually a new state correctional institution called Phoenix, which was Graterford before, which is also in our county. And then he'll be there and get designated, I believe, from there to one of the state institutions throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Exactly where that will be is unclear, and that won't be determined likely for a couple of weeks. But for now, Bill Cosby, the 81-year-old comedian, is here at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility getting ready to serve his 3 to 10-year sentence. I'm live in Eagleville. Chad Prudelli, Channel 6 Action News.
Yeah, that, of course, where he will be issued his state uniform as well from that processing center. Okay, Chad, thank you. Our coverage continues online. There you can watch the moment Bill Cosby was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. Of course, the news conferences that followed the sentencing, as well as a timeline highlighting what led up to Cosby's day of reckoning.